Jammu and Kashmir has been in the news for all the wrong reasons recently. After the removal of Article 370, we had a great spell of peace, we had a great spell of development. You could see the national tricolour flying, fluttering proudly, in Lal Chowk, on the banks of the Dal Lake, all over Srinagar, all over Jammu and Kashmir, where there used to be ISI and Pakistani flags, today there is the tricolour. Where there used to be stone pelting, by and large there is peace. But then suddenly, once the Taliban finished the Pakistan sponsored conquest of Kabul, it was no rocket science to expect that Pakistan would now, focus all its energies and all its efforts onto trying to destabilize Jammu and Kashmir. I am surprised as to how we failed to anticipate this, and we seem to be acting as if we were surprised. Why should we have been? Why was a ceasefire signed with Pakistan in the month of February this year? We knew that he wanted peace on the Eastern Front so that Pakistan could capture or conquer the whole of Afghanistan. Unwittingly, we have facilitated the capture of Afghanistan by the Taliban. And now, Pakistan has turned its sights full onto Jammu and Kashmir. It has started for 2 years, it was sending in arms, ammunition, assault rifles, pistols, hand grenades, drugs and money through the drones. 2 years they launched a major offensive to try and supply weapons and ammunition to the beleaguered terrorists in Jammu and Kashmir via drones. Now it has started infiltration across the line of control in a major way. Jammu and Kashmir has been in the news recently and for all the wrong reasons. There have been targeted killings of minorities, there has been resumed infiltration, major encounters leading to casualties of our military personnel in South Kashmir, and Pakistan is quite obviously engaged in upping the ante. Look, after Pakistan captured Kabul through the agency, the sponsored agency of the Taliban, it was not rocket science to expect that it would now turn its attention onto Jammu and Kashmir and try and up the ante there. General Bajwa was keen for a ceasefire, quite obviously, because he wanted a free hand to capture Afghanistan. Was it our duty to facilitate the capture of Afghanistan by giving a ceasefire on Jammu and Kashmir, by freeing Pakistan's 11 Corps entirely, to send 3 SSG battalions, 3 Northern Light Infantry battalions, to send tanks and artillery to Afghanistan for the conquest of Afghanistan? We facilitated that wittingly, unwittingly. We were taken for a ride. But then when Pakistan stepped up the heat on the line of control itself, so far it was sending for the last 2 years just the drones to drop arms, ammunition, assault rifles, pistols, hand grenades in huge quantities, explosives, as also drugs and money. These were being flown in by Chinese made hexacopters and quadcopters all over Jammu and Kashmir from the north to the south. So the fact of the matter is, this ceasefire was a bit ill-timed, very ill-timed. Now, once Pakistan has captured and consolidated its hold in Afghanistan, as expected, it has turned its attention fully onto Jammu and Kashmir. It is now starting massive infiltration attempts to try and push in weapons, armaments, grenades, pistols, as also terrorists before the winter snows set in. It was no rocket science to anticipate that after Pakistan had completed the so-called conquest of Afghanistan, it would turn its attention entirely to Jammu and Kashmir. And in that, may I point out, it has been facilitated in by the Chinese, who have tried to come onto India's northern borders, who have tried to put pressure in Ladakh, so that they give Pakistan that assurance that don't worry about Indian reaction, don't get worried about the Uri type surgical strikes, don't get worried about the air strikes like a la Balakot. We are here and we will see that India does not retaliate or is not able to retaliate in that manner as it had done earlier. That had really shaken up Pakistan, and for 22 months after Balakot, Pakistan had carried out no major mass casualty terror strike in Jammu and Kashmir. Don't forget, this was the period when Article 370 was done away with. But apart from making verbal noises, Pakistan was not able to do a damn on the ground to try and alter the change scenario in Jammu and Kashmir. But now it is doing so, and it is trying to make up for lost time. That is why it is very perplexing to see that we are still carrying on with the ceasefire on the line of control. Now, what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to facilitate infiltration? Are we trying to facilitate the induction of weapons and explosives? Is it our job to facilitate Pakistan? Why this ceasefire? Why this sudden bonhomie and love fest towards Pakistan? Why are we playing a cricket match with Pakistan? Why are we violating our own stated principle that terror and talks do not go together? Terror and games and sports and ghazals and mushairas do not go together. The problem is, I cannot understand why we are persisting with the ceasefire. We have taken the principled position that terror and talks do not go together. Terror and cricket do not go together. Terror and mushairas and ghazals and seminars cannot go together. Why then are we holding a cricket match with Pakistan on our soil? What is the message we are trying to send? Suddenly our BCCI commitments override national interests? Can they override the killing of our citizens? Our citizens have been killed in cold blood. The military people have suffered heavy casualties. Dead bodies are going back to the villages for cremation. The people are crying, the people are in mourning, and here we want to hold a love fest with Pakistan in terms of cricket matches, in terms of inviting their NSA for talks. I mean, what exactly? What has made us resile from our principled position? We had given a clear message to Pakistan that if you shed Indian blood on Indian soil, you will face costs and consequences. You will have to pay costs and consequences on the Pakistani side of the line of control and the international border. And pursuant to this hot pursuit policy, we had carried out surgical strikes post Uri, we had carried out air strikes post Pulwama. These had shaken up Pakistan, and for 22 months it had thereafter done nothing in J&K. That was the time China came into the fray, and it tried to reassure Pakistan, and it tried to get Pakistan to resume the asymmetric war against India by stepping up pressure on India in Ladakh. It's another matter that China got it back, in full, and they got a bloody nose in Galwan, and they cut a very sorry figure south of the Pangong Tso when we occupied the Kailash Heights. And China was, has been quite chastened, but it is all the more putting pressure on Pakistan now that China can't tackle India in conventional military ops. It is putting pressure on Pakistan to intensify the asymmetric war in Kashmir and Punjab. It is, the onus lies on us to retaliate and to force Pakistan, to deter Pakistan from such adventurism. If we take it lying down, if we take it in a defensive reactive mode as we were doing for the last 30 years under the UPA, well, then we are inviting trouble. I would like to place the events in Jammu and Kashmir in context. Number one is the so-called aspect of ethnic cleansing. In 1990, when I was personally monitoring these operations from the Military Operations Directorate, I can tell you that in 1990, the JKLF under orders from the ISI carried out a ethnic cleansing, a genocide of the Kashmiri Pandits in Jammu and Kashmir. About 20,000 were killed, women were raped, houses were burnt, and from the mosques announcements were made to leave, to run away from Jammu and Kashmir and leave your wives and daughters behind. That was the ethnic cleansing, that was the genocide committed there. Yet we, under some strange notions of secularism, upholding secularism, the UPA government did nothing. I mean, the governments then just tried to bury it under the carpet so that it should not stoke emotions in the rest of India. There was no talk of this exodus, it was buried. There was no retaliation, there were no penalties put on the JKLF, etc. for carrying out this, no concerted operations. Let me try and explain what I am saying. I was in Kishtwar in 2000 to 2003 almost, beginning, and I was commanding my brigade there. Like in the valley, the terrorists, when we went for targeted killings of their senior commanders, they retaliated by attacking the Hindu community, the minority community, and an exodus had started from Kishtwar. Now, that time my options were, there was no way that I could have defended every village, every hamlet in 11,500 square kilometer area of the toughest mountains. So, we decided there was no point trying to defend every village, but the need of the hour was to attack those groups which were carrying out these massacres. We identified the group which had carried out the gruesome massacres, 5 Hindus in one village, 8 in another and 13 in Gulabgarh, and then we went hell bent for this group, and we announced that to hell with all the other terrorists, we were going to hunt down this group and we were going to kill them horribly. Finally, after a month, we were able to surround this group in a remote forest area, and in that encounter we used Russian thermobaric flamethrowers. We burnt that hut where they were down, and that sent a salutary message to all the terrorist tanzeems in that area of Kishtwar. In fact, we intercepted radio messages that whatever you do, don't kill Hindus because the army will turn upon you like mad dogs. This is what they were saying. September 2001, all killing stopped, and then the Hindus who had run away came back. So, when you take offensive action like this, you can retrieve the situation however bad it is, but when you get defensive and reactive, well, then you are inviting trouble. You will constantly be on the run, because the initiative would have been surrendered totally to the terrorists to plan their next move, to strike where and when they want, and all if you can do is react, then that is not good policy. Thank God this policy was changed, but once again we need to go back to that change policy. Let me give you another fact, very important fact about Jammu and Kashmir, very little known. I operated in Jammu and Kashmir from the year 2000 to 2005. At that time, there were 5,000 armed terrorists in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, 60% of whom were from the Pakistani Punjab and the others were from Afghanistan or the northwest frontier province. 60% were foreigners. We started killing them, and I remember the killing was the highest in 2001 in the time of General Rustam Nanavati, and the problem then was that however many terrorists we killed, Pakistan sent an equal number to replace them to keep the pot boiling in Jammu and Kashmir at exactly the right temperature. 2003, we started the construction of the fence, the electronic fence in Jammu and Kashmir, the electrically energized fence, and by 2005 we had completed it. 2005 thereafter saw a steep drop in infiltration. The infiltration was curtailed to the extent of 70 to 80% and more. no infiltration could take place. It became very difficult. Small driblets did happen now and then, but major infiltration was put a dead halt to. And at that time, not only had we used that fence, we used to send teams ahead of the fence armed with the Israeli handheld thermal imagers, which could see up to a kilometer plus at night. And with the help of those, any terrorists who were trying to cross the fence, we shot them ahead of the fence. And there was heavy attrition imposed on all infiltration, and it was brought down by 80, 85, almost 90%. Then we started killing the terrorists totally, and today there are just 150 terrorists or terrorists in the valley, and I am told recently these have been reduced to 108 by concerted operations. What they are trying to do is, they are trying to make up where there were 5,000, there are just 150. Please understand this. This quantitative analysis must be understood. The level of threat in J&K has been brought down. It is just that these handful of terrorists try to do high profile media profile activities, which will garner them lot of attention, much beyond their actual strength on the ground and their actual capability to do damage. That is why they know that they can't tackle the army and the security forces. Whenever they try, they are gunned down either on the spot or within the next few hours, or maximum 1 or 2 days later, their shelf life is over. Now they have started a very targeted policy of killing civilians, trying to create an exodus of the minorities from Jammu and Kashmir. And for this they have used OGWs, who generally are not as listed terrorists on the record of the security forces. They are supplied these pistols, these grenades to do targeted killings, so that it is so difficult to then identify them, locate them and carry out reprisal activities. So, with this, the media impact of their actions is far higher than the actual ground impact. For example, you ask the tourists, they are still going to Jammu and Kashmir and they find things very peaceful and normal there. It is the odd killing of these terrorists that is raises a very high media profile, draws a lot of media attention and creates a sense of alarm and despondency, which is not really justified, but we need to put a stop to it. We need to put a stop to it, and to do that, you can't defend every single citizen. You can't put a policeman with every labourer, with every teacher, with every shopkeeper. There are just not that many troops. You have to be offensive, like we were in Kishtwar. Identify the groups that are doing it. There is adequate amount of, I am sure there are video cameras that are there in every shop and corner, every street corner of Srinagar, and I am sure we should have their profiles on television. A number of them have been killed, and whosoever is left must be slaughtered, made an example out of. Because the only way to counter the fear induced by the terrorist is to impose fear on the terrorist. Counter terrorize the terrorist, not the local population. Go for the terrorist, terrorize the terrorist. Make sure he gets the message loud and clear. You do this and we will kill you horribly. If necessary, we will use flamethrowers. So, once that message goes, everything comes to an end. We had done this even when they were trying suicide bombing attacks. We made sure that all these suicide, wherever they hid, jerry cans of petrols were put and they were just put on fire. That's it. And all that stopped. So, you have to take certain harsh measures, ruthless measures to curtail these killings, these targeted killings. We have to be now very careful on the line of control. The encounter that is ongoing in Jammu and Kashmir now in its 13th day indicates that infiltration has taken place and possibly SSG or former SSG elements have come in who are well trained and who are trying to exploit the jungles to put up a fight. I served in Rajouri and Poonch as GOC Romeo Force. Just before my time, General H.S. Lidder had conducted Operation Sarp Vinash. They had again taken place in the jungles, the hideouts in jungles. It was very difficult to approach them. Every time we went, we suffered heavy casualties in Hilkaka area. An Operation Sarp Vinash was launched then. Artillery was used. Heavy force was used to launch a proper, surround them from all sides, use helicopters to hold the heights all around, to send troops to hold heights all around, and a massive concerted attack was made and they were wiped out. Now we can't act like a nanny state. We can't treat the terrorists with kid gloves, especially when you are quite clear that these are very specially trained terrorists, possibly with a sprinkling of SSG men. Then you use artillery, you use flamethrowers, you use heavy caliber guns, you use anti-aircraft guns in the ground role, you use missiles if you have to, but you knock them out. And I am very glad that the army chief has gone there personally and given this message. So they are now running from pillar to post, trying to hide in those caves and avoid this. We should use armed drones, armed helicopters, we should use artillery guns in the direct shooting role to finish this group as ruthlessly as possible. I don't see why we have to be very gentlemanly with them and use only small arms to clear them out. We need to get tough and we need to send a message. So in continuation of that, I once again raise the question, why this ceasefire? For whatever reasons it was given, those reasons have long outdated their shelf life. And now with Pakistan going gung-ho to infiltrate people, continuing with the ceasefire is tantamount to giving Pakistan a license, do whatever you want, infiltrate as many as you want, kill as many as you want. We will just now confine ourselves to reactive defensive defense. It is a recipe for disaster. For 30 years we had done that and we had taken so much losses, so many casualties. 21,000 people had been killed in Punjab, 45,000 people were killed in Jammu and Kashmir, civilians, security people, 15,000 were killed in the bomb attacks all over India from 1993 onwards. So now the point is, all this, how did it all come to a stop? When we did the surgical strike in Uri 2016, when we did in Pulwama the air strike, and that is what shook Pakistan up. For 22 months Pakistan was quiet, did nothing, no major mass casualty actions, right? And now, we have to ask ourselves the question, when we took away Article 370, why did Pakistan not do anything militarily? It was shaken up that it could result in war, full scale war, escalation, because India was prepared to strike 80 kilometers deep into Pakistan with its jet fighter bombers. So Pakistan had to think twice, had to think thrice. It completely stopped all provocations in Jammu and Kashmir, and it just, with a word of mouth tried to yell in the UN Security Council, UN General Assembly and all other fora, and it came to nothing. Now there is peace and quiet by and large in Jammu and Kashmir, apart from these recent targeted killings. There are, the Indian tricolour is proudly fluttering in Srinagar, in Lal Chowk, along the banks of the Dal Lake, everywhere you go in J&K, you see the tricolour fluttering proudly. That never happened before. All that, thank God, we threw away that stupid Article 370, which had long ago outlived its utility, and it should never have been put there in the first place. We should never have accepted Article 370. We all know the history of that. Sheikh Abdullah had personally gone to Nehru to get Article 370 introduced. He asked him to go to Dr. Bhim Rao Ambedkar, the law minister then. Ambedkar heard him out and his words were prophetic. He said, you want India to build your schools, your bridges, your hospitals, your roads, your schools, your colleges, and in return the Indian citizens will have no right in Jammu and Kashmir. This is treachery. And I, as the law minister, will never do it. We all know how he went back to Nehru with his tail between his legs, and then Nehru asked Iyengar, to draft this version of the Article 370, and he had it pushed through in a totally unconstitutional kind of a way. So, thank God this was removed. It has been a very necessary, very essential step, but thank God it has been taken, and it has made a sea change on the ground situation. The armed forces carried out concerted operations to kill the terrorist operation all out, and we have been able to bring the terrorist numbers down significantly. Very little foreign terrorists are able to come in. Most of the terrorists they have to make do with are the local boys, and who generally like to go for soft targets. The problem in Jammu and Kashmir is the fact that we put pressure, the military security forces put pressure, they bring down the level of violence, they improve the situation dramatically, and then suddenly there is an urge to, let's show normalcy, stop the operations, take away the military, take away the SIG, be nice to the people, be gentle, and in this act of kindness we have a snakes and ladder situation. The moment you give a reprieve to the terrorists, they resume their activities. They are forced to lie low because of concerted military security pressure. The moment you lift that pressure, well, they are back again at shooting the civilians, shooting this thing. If you stop CASO, if you stop these search and destroy operations, well, you take away the pressure. So, in trying to please the population, in trying to be popular, you say, okay, stop the operation. Sir, we have had many premature stopping of operations or lifting of the pressure in Jammu and Kashmir, which has caused the situation to slide back to zero. It's snakes and ladders. One of these reprieves you give to the terrorists, the situation goes back to 1 or 2, where you were near 98 and about to touch 100. So, that is the problem in Jammu and Kashmir. What do we do from here? Where do we go from here? That is the critical question. The first thing that we must do is we will have to abrogate this ridiculous ceasefire, which has only served the purposes of Pakistan. It was not India's job to facilitate Pakistan's conquest of Afghanistan. If we have made that mistake, we should now realize that we cannot afford a quiet environment which Pakistan exploits on the LC to start infiltration again. When there is artillery going on, when there are big guns firing, it is impossible for anybody to infiltrate. Impossible for anybody to infiltrate. So, we must abrogate the ceasefire right away. We must send a clear message to Pakistan that for the blood that it is shedding on Indian soil, there will be clear costs and consequences. We will strike across the line of control, if need be across the international borders, if need be we will come from the sea, from the air, from the land, but we will raise costs, and now we will also raise costs for the Pakistan army, which is the primary culprit. So far we were confining attacks to terrorist launch pads, bases, etc., training camps. Now I think if the Pakistan army does not behave, well, then it is not dealing with the Afghan army by any chance, and it has to deal with the Indian armed forces, the Indian Air Force, the Indian Navy, the Indian Army, and we should go back to that hot pursuit policy which we had given a shot across the bow in Uri, and when that did not suffice, we attacked, launched an air attack, concerted air attack at the Balakot air terrorist training camp, killed about 300 terrorists which they are trying to hide, but the fact is they have had massive casualties, and in any case, any such air attacks across the border can lead to major escalation, limited stroke full scale war. So, is Pakistan prepared for that? It thinks that America will bail it out, it thinks that China will bail it out. I would like to remind Pakistan of what happened in 1971. Richard Nixon was so well disposed towards Pakistan, even as Joe Biden is today. But at that stage, Even when the 7th fleet was sent into the Bay of Bengal, it did not prevent Pakistan's breakup into two. The Chinese kept saying they will come, they will come, they will come. No Chinese came to the rescue of Pakistan. So, Pakistan should not miscalculate. It should be made well aware that India will retaliate at a time and place of its choosing, that India will not mend fences and relation, India will not go the extra mile for peace if Pakistan intends to carry on with the asymmetric war. War and peace cannot coexist. India will not be able to, India will not countenance such attacks, repeated terror attacks and escalations in the asymmetric violence in Jammu and Kashmir and any attempts to spread that to Punjab. This will be deemed an act of war and India will react in a very, very concerted manner to raise costs and consequences for Pakistan. Pakistan will have to be made fully aware. The defensive defense policy does not work. The Panipat syndrome, we will fight the enemy only when he has come to Panipat, will have to be jettisoned. It has cost us historically in the past, it has cost us in the recent past. We cannot go back to that chimerical nonsense once again. We cannot go back to being goody-goody with a Pakistan that is bent upon doing you damage, breaking up your country and waging Ghazwa-e-Hind. The cheek, they are talking of the conquest of Hindustan, Ghazwa-e-Hind, the battle for the conquest of India. If they talk of that, they should get what is coming their way. And the peaceniks in India are the ones who need to be put on very firm hold. Along with this, with the conquest of Afghanistan, Pakistan is now trying to send huge consignments of drugs into India. 3,500 tons, 2,500 kgs. These are mind-boggling figures. They are trying to destroy the Indian youth. And we can't sit back on our haunches and say that let Pakistan do whatever we want, we will be reactive, we will be defensive, we will do nothing more than trying to save ourselves. What nonsense is this? We had jettisoned this ridiculous policy. The Modi government had enunciated a clear doctrine of retaliation. You do that to us, you cause Indian blood, loss of Indian lives, you will pay a price on your side of the border. You will pay a price, a heavy price. And if 10, 20, 30 killed, 40 to 50 killed, 200-300 killed doesn't deter Pakistan, we will raise the ante. We will take Pakistan to the level it wants. There is the doctrine of limited war under a nuclear overhang, and India is quite prepared to do it. And all this gibberish about 1.5 pav ka nuclear bomb, 2 pav ka nuclear bomb will not deter India. The Kargil war went on for 3 months non-stop almost. All the Pakistani nuclear arsenal failed to deter India's divisions from constantly attacking and throwing out every last Pakistani, slaughtering about 5 battalions worth of the NLI which had done the intrusion. So, India will take Pakistan to the level it wants. We are quite prepared for a limited war against a nuclear backdrop. It is up to Pakistan to desist. Thank you.